Tonight, I have 3 real horror stories sent in by my viewers, each one more terrifying than the last, so brace yourself. These aren't campfire tales, these are true accounts, exactly as they were sent to me. If you think you can handle them, stay with me till the end. Turn your lights off, close your eyes, because these stories will drag you into their world. And trust me, some of you might not make it back. Let's begin. This story was sent to me by Daniel Harris. He is 36 years old and lives in Pennsylvania. Daniel says this happened to him almost 10 years ago. He told me it is the scariest thing he has ever experienced in his life. Here is his story, exactly as he sent it to me. I had recently moved into a house that had been in my family for decades. It had belonged to my grandfather, then my father, and now it was mine. From the outside, it looked like any other aging home on a quiet Pennsylvania street, white paint peeling from the siding, an old wooden porch that creaked with every step, and a towering oak tree in the yard whose roots had begun to push through the cracked pavement of the driveway. I moved in during late autumn. The leaves had turned deep orange and blood red, and the nights had grown long. It felt like the perfect time to start fresh, but from the very first night, something felt wrong. It wasn't the house itself at first, but it was the silence. A silence so heavy it seemed to press against my ears. Even the usual neighborhood sounds, dogs barking, cars passing, the faint hum of a distant TV, were absent here. At night, it felt like the world outside had vanished. On my second night, as I unpacked in the upstairs bedroom, I found something strange in the closet. Pushed far back behind some old boxes was a small wooden door, barely 2 feet high, painted the same pale color as the wall. The edges were uneven, and there was no handle, just a small iron latch. Curiosity got the better of me. I unhooked the latch and pulled. The door creaked open, releasing a stale, cold smell like old earth and mildew. The space inside was pitch black, and I could see wooden boards leading downward at an angle. Not quite stairs, but not a crawl space either. I leaned in, trying to peer deeper, but the darkness seemed thick, almost solid, swallowing the faint light from the bedroom. I felt an odd chill crawl up my arms, and for a reason I couldn't explain, my heart began to race. Something about that little door made every instinct in my body scream to close it. So I did. That night, I barely slept. I kept hearing faint noises, like soft scratching, like nails on wood, and occasional thumps, as if something was moving inside the walls. At first, I thought it was just the house settling, but the sounds seemed to move, from the walls to the floor beneath me, then to the ceiling above me. By the third night, I began to dream about the little door. In the dream, it would open slowly on its own, and something would crawl out, not quickly, but with a slow, deliberate motion, as if it wanted me to see every inch of it. I never saw its full shape. I would always wake up just as it was about to emerge completely, my heart pounding. I told myself it was just stress from moving, but one evening, while sitting in the living room, I heard it. The distinct sound of the iron latch on that small door clicking open. Upstairs. My blood ran cold. I froze, listening. No other sounds followed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was now out, in the house with me. I grabbed a flashlight and slowly climbed the stairs. The air grew colder with each step, and when I reached the bedroom, The little door was indeed open. The darkness inside seemed thicker than before, almost oily. My flashlight beam didn't penetrate far, it just seemed to get swallowed whole. I stood there for a long moment, forcing myself to breathe steadily before I crouched down and shined the light in. Nothing, just wooden boards descending into blackness. I closed it again, this time pressing a heavy box against it. That night, I locked my bedroom door, something I had never done before. But dreams don't stop locks. That night, I woke up gasping. I could swear I had felt someone breathing against my neck. My room was pitch black, and for a few seconds, I couldn't move. My body felt pinned like a heavy weight pressed down on my chest. Then, slowly, the pressure lifted, and I was able to sit up. That's when I noticed it. The heavy box I had pushed against the little door was no longer there. It was across the room. I don't know how long I stood there in that dark hallway, frozen in place, listening to that faint scratching sound echoing from below me. My brain was screaming at me to get out of the house, but my legs felt like they'd been cemented to the floor. Finally, I forced myself to move. I thought, maybe if I just check, I'll be able to convince myself it's nothing. Big mistake. The basement door was at the far end of the hallway, tucked between the laundry room and an old storage closet. When I opened it, a wave of cold air hit me in the face. It smelled damp and old, like the air hadn't been disturbed in decades. I reached for the light switch, but when I flipped it, nothing happened. Perfect. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen counter and pointed it down the stairs. The beam barely cut through the darkness. My house was built in the late 1800s, and the basement looked like something out of a horror movie. Stone walls, low ceilings, and pipes that rattled in the silence. I started walking down, each step groaning under my weight. The scratching sound grew louder. It wasn't frantic, it was slow, deliberate, like someone or something was making sure I could hear it. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. No answer. I reached the bottom and swept the flashlight across the room. The beam landed on boxes, broken furniture, and a rusty old furnace in the corner. I thought maybe a raccoon or some stray animal had gotten in somehow. But then I realized something. The sound wasn't coming from the open space. It was coming from behind the furnace. My gut was screaming at me to turn around, but my curiosity won. I stepped closer, and that's when I saw it. A wooden panel in the wall, about the size of a small door. The scratches were coming from behind it. I crouched down and put my ear against it. I could hear faint breathing. Suddenly, the scratching stopped, and then 3 slow knocks. I stumbled back so fast I almost dropped the flashlight. My heart was pounding so loud I thought whoever or whatever was in there could hear it. I bolted up the stairs and slammed the basement door shut. I locked it, even though I knew if someone was behind that panel, a flimsy lock wasn't going to do much. For the rest of the night, I sat in my living room with every light on, just listening. The scratching didn't start again, but every so often, I could swear I heard the sound of someone breathing down there. The next morning, I called a friend of mine who's good with renovations and asked him to come over. I didn't tell him exactly what happened, just that I'd found something odd in the basement. When he arrived, we both went down with better flashlights. I pointed out the panel, and he knelt down to inspect it. "Huh," he said. "Looks like this hasn't been touched in decades." He pried it open with a crowbar. Behind it was a narrow crawl space, maybe 4 feet high, running along the length of the wall. It was pitch black inside, and in that blackness, two small, pale hands were pressed against the far wall. We both jumped back. Then we realized they weren't real hands. They were part of a mannequin with no head slumped in the corner of the crawl space. But here's the thing. The fingernails on those mannequin hands were worn down, like they'd been scratching. We sealed the panel back up immediately. My friend told me I should probably move. That was 20 years ago. I still live here, and every few weeks, I hear the scratching again. This story was sent to me by Sarah Whitaker. She is 36 years old and lives in Vermont. Sarah says this happened to her almost 19 years ago when she was just 17. She told me it is the one night she will never forget, and to this day, she still isn't sure if it was a dream, a haunting, or something far worse. I was 17 when it happened. Our family had just moved into a century-old house in a small town. Everyone said it was full of character, but really, it just smelled like damp wood and old books. My bedroom was at the end of a narrow hallway on the second floor. The first night, I noticed that no matter how tightly I closed my door, it would be cracked open in the morning. I blamed my younger brother, but he swore he never touched it. One night, around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming down the hallway. My parents' room was downstairs, so it couldn't be them. I thought maybe we had a burglar. I sat up, listening. The steps stopped just outside my door. The crack in the door was maybe an inch wide. That's when I saw her. A pale woman in an old-fashioned dress standing in the hallway. Her face was turned slightly, like she was listening for something inside my room. I froze. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then, without moving her feet, she leaned toward the door, closer and closer, until her face was almost at the crack. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. And then, she was gone. The next morning, I convinced myself it was just a dream brought on by stress. But when I opened my door, there was a single wet footprint on the hallway floorboards. We didn't have any carpets upstairs, and it hadn't rained in weeks. I was 23 when I moved into the old boarding house on the edge of town. It was cheap, too cheap, but I just lost my job and needed somewhere to stay fast. The landlord didn't ask many questions, just handed me a key and told me to avoid the third-floor hallway after midnight. I thought it was just some weird old superstition. The first week was fine, creaky floors, thin walls, the usual. But on the 8th night, I came home late after visiting a friend. It was around 1:30 a.m. The front door was unlocked, even though I'd sworn I'd locked it earlier. I stepped inside, and the whole building was too quiet. Not a sound. As I started up the stairs, I heard it. Slow, deliberate footsteps above me. The third floor. I froze because everyone who lived there was older and no one stayed up that late. I called out, "Hello?" No answer. The footsteps stopped. Then, just barely, I saw her. A woman in a long gray nightgown standing at the top of the stairs, her head tilted slightly to the side. Her hair was wet, like she'd just stepped out of the shower. "Sorry," I stammered, thinking she might be a tenant I hadn't met. "I didn't mean to..." She turned and walked down the hallway, away from me. No sound, no creak in the old floorboards. I should have gone upstairs to check, but something in my gut told me not to. I went to my room and locked the door. The next morning, I asked the landlord who she was. His face went pale. He told me that 15 years ago, a tenant named Maria had been found dead in the bathtub on the 3rd floor. They'd ruled it an accident, slipped, hit her head, but neighbors claimed they still heard her walking the hallway at night. And here's the part that makes my stomach drop. When I described her, the landlord just nodded slowly and said, "Yeah, that's her. She always wore that nightgown." I moved out 2 weeks later, but sometimes, even now, I swear I hear those slow footsteps in my sleep. I was staying at a rundown hotel in a small town in West Virginia for work. It was one of those old brick buildings where the carpet smells faintly of mold and every hallway feels about 2 feet too narrow. My room was at the far end of the 3rd floor. The first night, I noticed something strange. The hallway lights flickered slightly, but only when I walked past room 312. The rest of the floor was fine. When I asked the desk clerk about it, she just shrugged and said, "Old wiring." But the second night, things changed. I just stepped out to get ice. The hall was completely empty. I remember it so clearly. The hum of the vending machine, the faint buzz of the lights. Then, halfway back to my room, I froze. At the very end of the hallway, near the fire exit, a man was standing. Not moving, not leaning, just standing. He was tall, wearing a dark coat, and his head was slightly tilted like he was studying me. The weird thing was, the hallway there was dim, but I could still make out his face, pale, almost gray. I tried to play it cool. I nodded and said, "Evening." He didn't answer. I walked past room 312, glanced back. The hall was empty. I didn't hear footsteps. No door opened or closed. He was just gone. Later, I told one of the cleaning ladies about it. She got real quiet, then said, "That's the old manager? He died in '97. Heart attack. Right where you saw him." That night, I kept the lights on in my room. And when I finally drifted off to sleep, I woke at 3:12 a.m. to the sound of faint knocking on my door. When I looked through the peephole, the hallway was empty. I woke up at 2:43 a.m. Not because of a nightmare, not because of a noise. I just woke up. The room was completely dark, except for the faint orange glow from the motel sign outside bleeding through the curtains. My first thought was that the heater had stopped working. The air was ice cold, enough to see my breath. I could hear someone walking in the hallway. Slow, deliberate steps, but when they reached my door, they stopped. I held my breath, straining my ears. The air felt heavy, almost pressing against my chest. Then from the other side of the door came a sound I'll never forget. A faint whisper. I couldn't make out the words. They were too soft, too close. It was like someone was leaning right against the door, talking directly to it. I almost called out, but something in my gut told me to stay silent. Then the whispering stopped. That's when I heard it, the creak of the floorboards inside the room. I froze. My eyes darted toward the dark corner near the dresser. I swore I saw movement, the shape of a man just standing there. No features, no face, just a darker shadow within the darkness. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would give me away. I blinked, and it was gone. The heater clicked back on. Warm air filled the room. I was alone again. Or, at least, I think I was. When I checked out in the morning, I casually mentioned the cold draft to the front desk. The woman behind the counter looked up sharply and said, "You stayed in room 6, didn't you?" I nodded. She hesitated, then whispered, "Next time, don't open the door." If you want to hear more stories like this, turn out the lights, hit subscribe, and wait. I'll find you again.